Things on here just to introduce Camille Williams, who will be talking on the subject of veiled in flesh, an LDS perspective on the body. I'll get out of the way and we can take off. I think that her biographical sketch is also somewhat inaccurate. She's now working for the city of Provo, city of Provo as an attorney, but was at one point what it says here.
In my title, I've got the word LDS. Obviously, I don't represent the LDS Church. I'm very limited in my understanding. What I have to say represents my thought. And, you can see I'm at the wrong conference, can't you? Is it working now?
Yes.
Great. So my register is going to be that of everyday language and perhaps some of the religious register. And it reflects, of course, my interests, my training, and my lack of training in various ways. I want us to consider some things related to our embodied experience. Currently, it seems to me there's a significant dis-ease about the body, resulting in what might be viewed as a disintegration of the soul. That is to say, the mind or the spirit chafing against the structure of the body, as expressed perhaps in gender dysphoria, for example, Brandon, a little boy who insists he's a girl, or against social expectations for the body, as in the need to be super fit and look like Barbie at the same time, or what we do with the body, such as the contested area related to abortion, and issues of control of the body. The dissatisfactions may be manifest in beliefs or practices ranging from negative body image coupled with eating disorders. Karen Carpenter, of course, died, and Kelly Clarkson has suffered. We see it as we fight aging with elective plastic surgeries, if we can afford it. We see major investments in research and therapeutics to fight aging. As a matter of fact, Google versus death is sometimes the way it's said. We also see medical or technological efforts to transcend the limits of our biological sex or gender. And we see efforts to transcend the human condition generally, transcend the self via technologies such as cryonics, transhumanism, sometimes associated with the writings or the work of Lincoln Cannon, or Martine Rosenblatt. This is Bina, a robotic replica of Martine Rosenblatt's wife, Bina. And she's a social robot, the purpose of which, of course, is to sort of download what's sometimes referred to as the wetware, all of the experience in our brain. And we hope to a software, and we hope to a robot that would help make Bina immortal. And we sometimes see what might be a successful transcending of both gender and age with Stefani, who is a cross-dresser in his 40s who decided who he really is a 6-year-old girl. So these slides illustrate what might be considered relatively famous or extreme responses to the ordinary question each mortal faces. And that is, what's the point of being me? And our me-ness includes embodiment. Now, one of my first significant experiences with bumping up against bodiliness occurred when I was 11. That was the day my father explained to me that I was a girl. I was playing what became tackle football with my older brother and his friend, and had the misfortune of having my touchdown run cut short when the friend tackled me, and I fell, hitting my head on a water pipe which was conveniently located in the neighbor's yard at around our imaginary midfield. I went home crying, and my father comforted me by pointing out that over time I would likely lose interest in football, or might want to play with people my own size or change the sport, which might incidentally be protective of my ovaries, if not my brain. Being at that time much impressed with the utility of brute force, I thought it unlikely that this tomboy, whose doll-playing days were long gone, would ever be won over by babies. Turns out my father's practical wisdom has proven prescient. The phenomenon of figuring out who we are, our identity, and our purpose as embodied beings is the common experience of humankind. Religion and social mores have been common guides, but both of those things have been, sorry about the percussion, have been deconstructed, interrogated, and problematized, at least in the first world, and in popular culture in the academy and in popular culture, to the extent that many feel that the only thing that remains today is narrative only. As sexual dimorphism of the body and gendered behavior have been interrogated, such as in the work of Anne Fausto Sterling, notions of sexual and gender identity have been foregrounded as central to the self. Self-definition, social construction, and reliance on medical technology sometimes seems to win out over what appear to be the simple facts of embodied being. Martine Rosenblatt dismisses as unimportant the external trappings of the body, such as the genitalia and the reproductive tract in a TED Talk, and tells a familiar joke with a twist. She asks, why does the libertarian chicken cross the road? Well, the libertarian chicken dreams of the day when no one asks why they cross the road. It's your body. It's your choice what you choose to do with it. It's not even our place or business to be judging them or asking them why. In other words, if the body has a purpose, it's up to each individual embodied being to find a purpose for his or her or their self. Martine speculates that she changes her gender as often as she changes her hair. And certainly gender identities have proliferated. Some colleges list 9, Facebook has more than 50. So are we do-it-yourself embodied beings? That seems an unsatisfactory answer, if it's an answer at all. It seems a bit odd that God would create a being without a purpose, or that random mutations of natural selection coupled with cultural evolution should result in an organism fundamentally at odds with its own body. Where's the parsimony in that? Patterns of socialization are generally blamed for making either the body or gender a cage against which contemporary sensibilities must break free. Some of us are blithely sailing along through life cisgendered, at least for now, while others are struggling to align body and identity, and still others are adopting a fluid sexual and gender identity, as suggested by the research of Lisa Diamond. Now, even if being divided against ourselves is an accurate reflection of who we are now in a fallen world, is that all there is for us? Perhaps LDS doctrines related to the mortal body could help us find a way to wholeness, that is, a soul receiving joy in body and spirit. Consistent with LDS beliefs, the body and gender, maleness or femaleness, are gifts with which we are endowed premortally, mortally, and eternally. So a first important teaching is that mortal embodiment is an innate good necessary for our development, perfection, and power. Joseph Smith is quoted as saying, the great principle of happiness consists in having a body. Of course, it sometimes doesn't feel that way. I have a friend with several chronic health conditions who reminds herself, I wanted this body. I cheered at the plan, and now I am living the dream. LDS doctrine also supports the notion that the physical body is sacred, a gift, an endowment, a sign of our royal birthright. That's Talmage, quoted in Elder Holland's Souls, Symbols, and Sacraments. While mortality or embodiment is often referred to as living with a veil separating us from God, Bruce Hafen argues that the value of the veil is that it allows us to acquire experiential knowledge that was impossible in the pre-existence. It's a fact of nature that, and I'm quoting him, salvation is a process as well as a goal. Salvation involves growth, development, and change. That process implies that in mortality we must learn capacities and skills, not merely pick up information. The process of becoming Christ-like is a matter of acquiring skills more than a matter of learning facts and figures. And there's something about the nature of developing those divine skills that makes it impossible even for God to teach us those things unless we participate in the process. We shouldn't expect it to be otherwise. What piano teacher could teach people to play if they were unwilling to practice? What coach could improve the capacity of an athlete without supervising the athlete's own trials and errors? In discussing development and mortality, Elder Hafen cites Polanyi's view, quote, that we can learn a skill only by imitating the skillful performance of one who has mastered that skill, even though the teacher whom we imitate cannot specify and measure every detail of his art. He contends, Elder Hafen does, that there is a close analogy between this view and the central gospel concept that knowing the Savior personally and emulating his example is the ultimate way of living the gospel, a way that transcends merely following specific commandments and detailed doctrines. Elder Bednar also describes the advantage of learning while embodied. Our physical bodies make possible a breadth, a depth, and an intensity of experience that simply could not be obtained in our premortal estate. Specifically, he notes that in this class room, we experience tenderness, love, kindness, happiness, sorrow, disappointment, pain, and even the challenges of physical limitations in ways that prepare us for eternity. Simply stated, there are lessons that we must learn and experiences we must have in the flesh, according to the flesh, which makes a lot of sense to those of us who expect bodily resurrection and hope for exalted bodies of glorified flesh and bones. Further, Elder Bednar, while acknowledging the blessings of technology, also cautions against the influence of cyberspace technologies which could beguile us, that's his word, quote, to behave as embodied spirits, to disconnect gradually and physically from things as they are. In essence, the devil encourages us to think and act as if we were in our premortal, unembodied state, and if we let him, he can cunningly employ some aspects of modern technology to accomplish his purpose. Please be careful of becoming so immersed and engrossed in pixels, texting, earbuds, twittering, online social networking, and potentially addictive uses of media and the internet that you fail to recognize the importance of your physical body and miss the richness of person-to-person communication. Beware of digital displays and data in many forms of computer-mediated interaction that can displace the full range of physical capacity and experience. A second crucial belief is that we are beings with divine potential. Each soul is spirit and body, is male or female, and is made in the image of an embodied but certainly glorified God, and has a divine nature and destiny, according to Elder Holland. As Sherry Dew expresses it, we were born for eternal glory. Urging us to feel the measure of our creation, Rosemary Wixon stated that Heavenly Father generously shares a portion of his divinity within us. That divine nature comes as a gift from him with love that only a parent can feel. We come to this earth to nurture and discover the seeds of divine nature that are within us. While not couched in the language of metaphysics, those statements seem to exemplify what Benjamin E. Park calls Joseph Smith's theological view of, quote, an origin for human souls that describes them as co-eternal with God, differing only in progress along an eternal spectrum rather than making humans a separate ontological species. This view of embodiment as a natural developmental stage also contrasts with some commonly held views that our biological existence, primarily from natural selection, determines our destiny, and our individual moral agency is highly mediated, if not illusory. Carol F. McConkie has referenced LDS beliefs articulated by John Woodstow that we made premortal covenants to enter, quote, into a partnership with God, close quote. That, quote, the Father's work and the Savior's work also become our work. Embodiment is part of the fulfillment of that covenant, and Sister McConkie emphasizes the LDS view of mortality as resulting from the exercise of premortal agency, in contrast to views that emphasize creation ex nihilo or human depravity. Another teaching is that each of us is made for serving in body and spirit, but our bodies are not our own, and that is true in several ways. We carry with us in our very bodies our own material history. We each embody those who have gone before us. We are born through our own mother's flesh and blood. Embodied, veiled in flesh, we are brought into mortality to learn how to serve God in the body, male or female, individually and collectively. Parenthetically, of particular interest to me is the way in which the restored gospel of Christ makes sense of the lives and the work of women throughout the ages. Women are centrally crucial to the success of the mortal experience, that great plan of happiness. A willingness to bear what's been referred to as the souls of men is necessary if the classroom of mortality is to be available to God's children. Now, a variety of life experiences raise for us who and how we are in the body. Disability, illness, the death of a loved one. Certainly, Stephen's death has brought this home to all of us recently. These themes provide impetus for examining our embodied state and in performing physical and spiritual labor. Note, for example, the daughter and the son who care for their aging and ailing parents, the son who donates bone marrow for his father undergoing transplant to cure leukemia, the sister who adopts her impaired sister's child, the brother who takes in and rehabilitates his sister's son who's been addicted to drugs. All of those things demonstrate and teach us things about service in the body and our relationship to other people and to God. For many of us, the aspects of family with primary impact on our notions of embodiment are marriage and procreation. As Elder Holland says, we find that we are made for each other, man and woman made to fit together. As one flesh, husband and wife joined for eternal union and for increase in this life and in the next. In marriage, husband and wife give themselves wholly to each other, therefore their bodies are not their own. Again, in procreation, we may see bodies not as our own to control, as we would a piece of equipment. While we may have the power to contracept or to abort, and keep in mind those are merely the powers of destruction, we have much less control over the power of life, contraception, gestation, and sustaining life. Pregnancy can quickly dispel the view that we are in control of procreation or even our own pregnant bodies. Morning sickness, swelling, shifting of the center of gravity, and a host of other bodily sensations stretch us beyond what we think our bodies can do before the birth of the child. The 24/7 neediness of the newborn immerses especially the mother in the bodily activities of daily life. Lactation binds mother and child for a period of months, and it's not unusual to feel that the needs of the child in its vulnerabilities supersede the mother's and the father's need for sleep or even food. A father gifted with a child may reassess his body as appearing to him to be more clumsy or less adapted to provide comfort and nourishment. For the infant, then, is his wife's. He may later find himself the willing or surprised favorite horse or jungle gym of choice, his body more adapted to roughhousing or to huge protective hugs than mom's. It is common for parents to give up their own bodies to protect and to provide service to their children, ranging from breastfeeding, changing, bathing, carrying, teaching, working extra jobs, or a multitude of other ways. This nurturing turns the parent from his or her own embodied self toward the child and toward his or her needs, physical and spiritual. The birth of a child convinces us that indeed we are, as the psalmist says, fearfully and wonderfully made. And if a mouse be miracle enough in Whitman's terms to stagger sextillions of infidels, surely a baby should stagger us all. And they generally do. Our materiality is reflected not only in our own bodies, but as we mature, we see the material tokens of ourselves in our parents, and in our children, and in our grandchildren too. The multi-generational family builds a rich material, social, and spiritual history across the lifespan. To some extent, it is in the family we learn something about becoming like God, not with the same power and scope, but with invitations toward the same end of loving and caring for others in individual and intimate ways. With these experiences in our own veil of flesh, we may at times experience division from others and from God, and risk becoming divided within. Elder Bednar characterizes a variety of activities as ultimately misuse of the body or minimizing the importance of the body, including cyberspace technologies, which he characterizes as sense-dulling and spiritually destructive. Furthermore, he raises what he terms, quote, an apostolic voice of warning about the potentially stifling, suffocating, suppressing, and constraining impact of some kinds of cyberspace interactions and experiences upon our souls. A religious voice expressing similar concerns about, shall we say, perhaps a less than thoughtful rush into technology. I think he emphasizes the impact of some kinds of technology upon our souls, in part because in a very real sense our souls are not our own either. We are not in mortality because of our own actions alone, and the eternal, inseparable union of our spirits and our bodies is not within our own power to achieve. Rather, we, quote, enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he hath consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. Hebrews 10:19 and 20. Indeed, we are bought by the one who poured out his soul unto death, that we might rise again and live eternally. Now, how the spirit body and the mortal body are so, quote unquote, intimately intertwined, as John Tanner calls it, isn't explicitly stated in Scripture. The developmental approach makes some sense to me. The notion that the spirit somehow grows into the body, gradually learning how to think, move, act, as we grow from a spirit son or daughter to a living soul, a spirit newly veiled in flesh by our mother's body, whether it be that the spirit body is enmeshed, intertwined with flesh, or that the body is animated or quickened by the spirit, I don't know. Certainly veils are a boundary between the mortal and the divine, and it makes some sense that every temple, including the body, has a veil, since that is a significant point at which we may learn more about the divine. I think Arthur King was right in saying that the spirit and the body are so integrated as soul that our metaphors fall short. That is to say, the spirit is in the body, but it isn't like a squirrel in a cage. Or as Catholic author Robert P. George expresses it, we don't sit in the physical body and direct it as an instrument the way we sit in a car and make it go left and right. Following what is George's ultimately natural law argument, we lose coherency and the integrated nature of the soul when we try to split ourselves into mind or spirit only, or reduce ourselves to a bundle of neurons. After all, we are not able to pinpoint a time, George says, in which we either perceived ourselves as unembodied or existed as bodies without minds or spirits. Therefore, George concludes, quote, this experience of unity of body, mind, and spirit is itself no mere illusion, close quote. Truman Madsen asked, is all of real man immortal? And then answered, quote, it is not uncommon in the world religions to hope that only one aspect or a fragment or a faculty or mode of man will live on. For Plato, this is the immortal soul. For Aristotle, it is reason. For the Buddhists, it's the ultimate nature of the enlightened in a distinctionless nirvana. For the Christian scientists, it's pure mind. Joseph Smith taught that all of real man is immortal, mind, spirit, and body. Therefore, the analogy of similarity between the conditions we know here and the conditions hereafter is thoroughgoing. Our body, the body we now have in its essential elements, is ours forever. The decision to accept embodiment was voluntary. Now it's made, it's irreversible. Your body is permanently yours as you are permanently you. While Madsen asserts that ontological suicide, the craving for annihilation, is a will-o'-the-wisp, he does admit it's a mistake to believe that LDS doctrine sees death as an illusion. The mortal predicament isn't simply that we have a deadline beyond which the body will temporarily dissolve. It's that while still in the body, we may so imbibe the poisons of sin that we suffer in more or less degree the permanent blows of death. One key for understanding all of the ordinances of the gospel, beginning with the rebirths of baptism and culminating in the sealings of the temple, is that all are instruments of overcoming both death of the body and death in the body. My view is that each of us must come to terms with our bodies, weak, limited, but capable of being perfected through Christ. That perfection, that wholeness, that integrity is possible for body and spirit, possible for the soul. Our challenge as embodied beings is, as Truman Madsen puts it, to learn to live with ourselves. Thank you. One question is, how do two married persons become one flesh? Instead, don't they become one in purpose? If you read George's analogy, he argues that in the procreative act, two people become as much one flesh as any two people could become. And I think many people see the production of a child, a living version of those two becoming one flesh. Ideally, they are also one in purpose. So that's probably a long way of saying, there's my best guess. In the last 20 years, we've seen an incredible increase of physical risk-taking activities in which, for the sake of adrenaline boost and popularity, many individuals are losing their lives or seriously injured. What's your take or view on such behaviors and activities? I'm a mother. Stop it. We have, and I have wondered, frankly, whether it's a substitute for something else. Part of it may be a way of proving ourselves. Part of the way is that sensation equals aliveness for some people. And if there isn't something immediately bigger than themselves, whether it's another loved one, whether it's God, something else, then what we have are the sensations of your own body. And I guess we become addicted to upping how we feel one way or another. Our own chemicals or added chemicals. Another question, if the premortal soul has divine or eternal qualities, as in LDS doctrine, my question is, where does that place sin? Is sin also divine or eternal? Is it only in the body? Is it simply manifest in free agency? This question may be more of a question of sin in LDS doctrine, but I'd like to understand it in relation to the premortal existent teaching. I'm sure that I'm not up to that question, but part of the story of the life before this life had a lot to do with whether one decided to follow the Father or whether one decided not to. And that seems to me to be what characterizes sin, is whether we follow the Father or whether we choose not to. So I may not perceive the question as causing a problem to me. Does that mean you could sin premortally? I would say yes, you could sin premortally. It said that the government has no business being in my pants, but if so, then what should I make of this Title IV legislation, or is it Title IX legislation? Okay, sorry. And it might be my Roman numeral in numeracy. How can a basketball team be fielded distinctly for women if a university cannot establish this identity in a scientific manner? The category of woman is certainly contested right now in a number of areas, and the questioner brings up a good question. How could one even say one, if we don't know what the category of woman means without being able to specify it in terms we all agree, then how can you even say, I feel like I'm a woman trapped in a man's body or a man trapped in a woman's body, or that you are cisgender, your body and your gender, you feel like a woman and you look like a woman, therefore you have some congruency. If we've emptied the categories or emptied the definitions and reduced them just to this is what I feel, then there is a loss. In terms of what the EEOC is doing right now, though, they do seem to be taking the tack that if this is the way the individual feels about him or herself, will work to enforce that. And I think it is going to be very difficult for all of us to know how to follow the enforcement guidelines, which include right now, for example, that restroom use of locker rooms in various places. If you view yourself, for example, the example that most people object to is women in the locker room in partial states of undress. See a 50-year-old male walk in who sits down, may be partially undressed, or he may go into a sauna and be even less dressed. And they may feel threatened. They may feel like it's an invasion of privacy, and yet there are instances in which the institutions have said, look, if he feels like a woman, he doesn't have to undergo any kind of physical transformation. He doesn't have to dress like a woman. If that is who he is, we'll accept it. And so you have Planet Fitness in Michigan tossing out the women who complained about the man in the locker room. So I think the law is unsettled and it's highly and hotly contested right now. It will be interesting to see whether better minds than mine work it out. People have told me that a God who cannot make people learn or something like that is a limited God. How would you respond to this? Maybe it's an issue of what God wants to do, but it seems that if we are of the same stuff in some sense, albeit very, very limited, that God is, then would you really want, for example, the power to make someone love you? I heard someone say yes. But no, I don't think because it would be there would be a falseness. It would be something that I had created. What you want is some kind of self-giving love from that person, not something that by either magic or violence you have wrested from them. And that is why in Moses, Enoch sees God weeping. How is it that God can weep? The immortal God, the unchanging God, the God of all the universe, that he created his people and commanded that they should love him. And they don't. So, to me, that's the kind of God we have to ask the question about, and perhaps not simply see him in terms of power. You've given me more time than I was entitled to. Thank you.